Hey friends, you're watching Brainstorm Acres. I'm Henry.
And I'm Irene. When it's 110 degrees outside, if you had no ventilation in there, it could easily be 140 or 150 in the greenhouse. Think about how hot a closed-up car can get. And a closed-up car has very little glass in comparison to the amount of transparent surface on a greenhouse. So that was something we looked at.
Yeah, so we ended up siting the greenhouse where we did because it isn't in the way of shading our solar panels. It isn't in the way of our driveway. It's within probably 120 feet of our front door, so it isn't a terribly long walk. It isn't close to a water connection. It wasn't really close to an electric connection. This is a temporary greenhouse. This is a temporary structure in terms of what the county would consider it. So we don't have permanent things going to the greenhouse. Everything ends up being plugged in one way or another. Now we have some lights in it because sometimes we need to work after dark.
Yeah, well, when I go into do the last check, make sure everything's locked down for the evening, and at this time of the year sometimes turn on the heater, it's nice to not have to sit there with a flashlight in your teeth. It's nice to be able to walk in the door, flip the switch on, and go.
Some things that we did wrong when we set up the greenhouse. I set the greenhouse up with two windows, one at the south end and one at the north end. Now keep in mind the wind in our area comes from the south, southwest. So the wind is coming at a little bit of an angle, and the velocity of the wind was plenty high enough to blow enough volume of air through the greenhouse to remove hot air from the greenhouse. So you open up the window at one end and you open up the window at the other end, and everything should just come through. So we had a normal greenhouse, normal East Coast greenhouse door on the south side, and we had a normal greenhouse door on the north side. And what did we find out?
It wasn't enough.
Wasn't close to enough.
Not even close.
So the original intent was to extend our season so we could get seedlings started in the greenhouse
Instead of the
early.
dining room or the kitchen.
Yeah, early in the season, and let them grow in there until the risk of frost and freeze hadn't completely disappeared in the outside garden, but it was really reduced so that we could actually get plants in and get things off before we had a major business event in late July or beginning of August.
Right, right.
So we could actually do that for a lot of different crops.
But we had to figure out a way to cool the greenhouse. It was just not enough, so we started with...
Well, I killed some seedlings before we got the additional fan in there.
Right. And now we have a fan in the north end up in the window.
That's the exhaust fan, so it's pulling air out the same direction that the southwest wind comes. But more importantly, it's pulling air from a evaporative cooler, swamp cooler that we have in the south. Now we could have built an evaporative cooler called a water wall on the south side, but I wasn't sure how much we needed. I didn't know whether or not we'd need additional fans or whatever else. I didn't know how much water it was going to take.
Takes a huge amount of water.
So what I decided to do was to buy a commercial evaporative cooler, swamp cooler.
Right, we found one on sale at a big box store.
We did. We got it at about half price, which was about twice as much as I wanted to spend, but it would do the job.
Right. And then became the water problem. How do you hook it up? How do you keep that steady supply of water? And the amount of water it uses is pretty intense.
Yeah, so the first several years we ran water from our faucet out in the north yard of our house, so we had 200 feet of garden hose that stretched from there to the south end of the greenhouse to feed water to this evaporative cooler, and it worked.
Well, we tried at IBC tote.
Well, I tried it, and there's
It doesn't give enough pressure.
it failed. So
Yeah, it's still a nice place to store water, but it doesn't do any good really there.
and we have water in the tote because I don't want the tote to fly away. So
Right. So at some point we'll use the water out of it and
move the
move
tote.
it someplace else.
Remove the tote and the stand that I built.
Right. It's a really nice stand.
Works well. So the evaporative cooler has 3 speed settings for fan only,
Right.
and 3 speed settings for
Fan plus water.
fan plus water. And most of the time we never go beyond 2 in either direction. Most of the time.
Right. At this time of year, I'm relying mostly on the north fan to pull the heat out, and then the south fan is set so that if it gets 75 degrees or over, it will kick on 2 to help push more heat out. We watch the temperatures carefully, and I'm out there multiple times a day usually, monitoring. I need to charge one of my remote stations. It conked out again on me, and I think it's just run out of juice. But having a remote station in the kitchen so that as I walk through the kitchen, I can easily glance at that and tell what the temperature of the greenhouse is super important.
Yeah, it becomes a habit going through the kitchen. Either way, either one of us going through will look over at that monitor and say, the temperature is now 85, the temperature's now 90, the temperature's now 95. What do we need to do different than what's going on right now, because it's only 11 o'clock in the morning and we know it's going to get hotter.
Right. So we're always watching to make sure that it's not getting, it would be nice. I mean, the fancy greenhouses, the real commercial ones, they're completely automated. They don't have to have a human being there at all. They have, everything's thermostatic control, and it would just automatically turn on a pump with water to provide, this, that, the other thing, and could keep the temperature down. You'd set your limits that you want your greenhouse temperatures to be between. At least at this point, that's really kind of beyond us. We are using thermostats on our exhaust fans, and that helps a lot. And we do have a thermostat on the... Yes.
You have a friend.
I do. We do have a thermostat on the swamp cooler too.
We have thermostats
Everywhere.
on everything. The only thing is with the evaporative cooler, we have to select the fan speed, which is the amount of air that we're going to pull through, which is going to be the amount of cooling that we're going to produce. So
Right.
we do turn it up to 3, which is the highest setting. I think that's about a 400 watt draw, something like that.
Right.
Which we'll talk later about electrical draw for the greenhouse and what we're doing about that. Now there's one more thing we did for cooling. Remember the first time we tried using shade cloth, we used some green shade cloth and some brown shade cloth. And we found out?
The green shade cloth worked pretty well. The plants seemed to like that. They did not like the brown shade cloth.
Well, it was cool. It was cool enough in the greenhouse.
Yes.
The problem was
They didn't like the light that the shade cloth was providing. So last year, I actually used row cover.
yeah, we talked about it and decided that row cover in our regular garden does drop the temperature for the plants about 10 degrees, I think.
Enough, let's put it that way. It helps. And it really helps. In the garden, it also helps to dramatically drop the amount of evaporation you have, which is one of the main reasons to use it there.
So row cover is simply a white
Sort of
non-
a spun bun.
spawn bun, non-woven
Yeah.
material. It holds up pretty well to high winds.
It depends on the variety in terms of the thickness of it and stuff like that. Some of them are really lightweight and are really designed only to keep bugs off. Others are and will barely reduce the amount of sun that's getting through. Others can give you up to like 6 degrees frost protection. So obviously they have less light getting through.
So we just used the row cover last year. And
Right, we strung it over the top
and then
and
we
put it in the wiggle wire.
We put in wiggle wire to hold it in place,
Yeah.
and
It
that
worked
worked
great.
very, very well.
It drops the temperature. You could, the first time we tried it, I remember when we tried it, we were trying to find some stuff. I had gone online to try and find some stuff, and the prices for commercial quality shade cloth were not on our list of budget items that month. At hundreds of dollars. I'm sure I hit the wrong spot because I know now some better places I can get it from. So we just went down to one of our big box stores and picked up some shade cloth like people would use over pergolas and stuff in their yard just to provide more shade in the summertime. And we put it on, and by the time we walked in, you could already feel that the temperature was dropping. And it was like magic. So we kept putting it on. And we had, at the beginning, I think we bought 2. And then we were able to buy 1 more, but then we wound up with a couple of brown ones because you buy what they have at the store, and we could really tell in the greenhouse where the green ones were and where the brown ones were. The plants did not like the brown ones. It's because it altered the light.
Yeah, plants like a specific spectrum of light, and the green shade cloth didn't interfere too much with the spectrum that plants like, but the brown definitely cut out some of the pieces of the spectrum. That's the color, so red and blue, green.
Right.
So it cut out some of the important pieces of the spectrum.
And see, the advantage to using row cover was that's designed to be used with plants, so it's designed to transmit the right kind of light, and it's super light in comparison to the shade cloth. It's much more navigable in terms of getting it up there and stuff like that. It was easier to use. So now we have a pile of shade cloth. We have to think up some other things to do, which we have thoughts about that. Of course, there's always something else to use, but we have a stash of shade cloth right now that we're not using. But yeah, that was a major breakthrough for us. And
in commercial greenhouses, a lot of them use a very expensive piece of equipment to go over the greenhouse and to apply often a lime wash. So what they're doing is they're reducing the amount of light they get by putting a white material on the
right.
on the
And in
greenhouse.
Arizona, you'll see very few commercial greenhouses that are actually clear. They're almost always white, and they're buying plastic that was white to start with. And why we didn't know that. I mean, we just really didn't know. We read everything we could find, and we don't need it to be as transparent as it is.
Yeah, I'd done some work in a greenhouse. It was a traditional, old school, glassed-in house that was heated with steam.
Mm-hmm.
It was in New England. It was a long time ago, and greenhouses have come a very long way.
That's on the same level as the big Victorian greenhouses that the rich people had on their estates. They were, they were made out of metal. They were painted. They were well maintained. They're beautiful. They're just really beautiful. I mean, a glass greenhouse is like, the be all end all.
Our greenhouse is functional. It
Yes.
produces food for us. Now, we'll talk some more in a future show about things we've learned about growing plants year-round in our greenhouse, in our climate. Mm-hmm. One of the things I have to say is that everything we're talking about today has been learned in our area, in our climate,
Right.
with all of the restrictions that we have, whether it's water, whether it's wind. Those are all things that we've learned here. You don't necessarily have to do everything that we've done, but if you face some of the same kind of problems, we have some kinds of solutions.
Right. I find a lot of people will watch some YouTube video about somebody who throws up some inexpensive little
Half-inch PVC pipe.
half-inch PVC pipe greenhouse in their backyard, and they think they can do that here too. In fact, I actually saw somebody post last year on one of the local groups about, oh yeah, they had this PVC, oh, and it fell down. And everybody's like, yeah. If you've lived here for more than 15 minutes, you should know that. But people, they see it on TV, so they assume it's right. It worked for this guy in Washington State, in suburbia, so it's going to work for me here. No, it may or may not. And you have to, this is a common sense moment. You have to use your common sense, which I recognize is not common at all. But if you live in an area where 20 mile an hour, 25 mile an hour wind, 25 mile an hour per wind is a daily thing, which is what it is here. That's our low winds in the spring. And gusts of 35, 40 are also a daily thing. And then when we get a storm come through, it can get quite a bit higher. When we built this house, we put a 120 mile an hour wind roof on it on purpose, because why would we do anything less than that? You know?
Now, one thing that we'll talk about very briefly right now is the cost to construct our greenhouse. Now, keep in mind that we bought the top rails years ago.
Mm-hmm.
The price that we paid then was a lot less than it is now. I haven't looked at top rail price recently, but all said, based on the materials that we have in that greenhouse, we spent between $1,200 and $1,400 to actually build everything that's there.
Right.
We used OSB for the two ends. We used 2x4s to frame the ends in. We used the top rails for the bows, ground posts for what went into the ground, and then top rail for the purlins.
Right.
So everything is commonly available. How much you spend depends on how big you make it. Our greenhouse is 12 by 40 feet, which is a pretty big greenhouse for a home operation. On the other hand, we grow all year round, or most of the year round. We may not grow for part of the summer this year. We'll see.
We'll have to see. There was a challenge that was put forth by one of the YouTube channels in January, I think. Three Rivers. There's two challenges. One was putting up stuff so it would be in the pantry, and the other one was eating only out of the pantry. So, and the rules are the rules you make yourself, which is something I really like because nobody was telling me I was doing it wrong. And you have to make allowances for what you do. We do not raise chickens. We do not raise meat of any sort at this point. We do consume chickens and eggs and meat and all that kind of stuff, and we don't have any dairy animals. So that means I'm allowed to buy dairy and eggs and meat from the grocery store. But most of our meat is brought in large quantity when we go to a big box store and we buy the big packages and we break it down into individual servings and it goes in the deep freeze. So it's in there. We were listening to somebody brag the other day about their amazing gardening skills. And my thought, which I did not allow to come out my mouth, was what percentage of your vegetables for the winter have you grown in your greenhouse? I can honestly say that, now we have brought some fruit because we don't have the capacity to produce our fruit here yet. From January 1st through March, the only vegetation we bought at the greenhouse was I ran out of green onions.
Oh, bought at the store.
I mean, at the store rather,
right.
at the grocery store, was green onions. Everything else in terms of vegetables either came from our freezer, from things that we had grown during the summer and blanched and frozen, or things that we had canned, or straight fresh from the greenhouse. Now, if you're going to do that, you're going to have to learn to eat seasonally. But seasonal for us here right now is cabbage, kohlrabi, rutabaga,
Lettuce,
multiple different kinds, spinach,
carrots,
and broccoli. That's not bad. And then we've got all our things that are frozen. So we literally just bought, I was doing a bunch of Chinese food and I just didn't have enough green onions. So when Henry was going to, and it was that 1 month gap when our chives outside are not producing. So otherwise I could have used the chives. And I did use some of the leeks that we have out there. But I didn't want to prune them back too hard. So I just had him, when he was picking up milk, pick up some green onions. That's the extent of what we bought.
Actually, you realize that's the extent of what we've bought since the day after Thanksgiving in 2021. And the only thing that we bought specifically for Thanksgiving that we didn't raise here on the homestead was I bought a cauliflower and I bought some large baking potatoes because I wanted to have large russets.
Right. Oh, and we were out of rutabaga at that point.
That's true.
So, so we bought 3 things for Thanksgiving, and everything else was our own. So, We watched Homesteading Family talking about input versus output. They spent for one of their gardens when they moved to Tennessee. They spent $2,000 to get the soil improved, put in all the infrastructure, do all this stuff. And she said that their neighbors thought they were crazy. Well, they kept a really tight control assessment of what they got out of it that year. $7,000 worth of fresh vegetables. And that's not counting the fact that for us, we have to drive a considerable distance. And if you've noticed, the price of fuel has gone up a lot. So for us not to have to go to the store, for us to sit there and go, what do you feel like for dinner? I've got some broccoli from the greenhouse. How about some, and I just walk out there and go get it. I mean, I didn't have to go anywhere. There's no fuel involved except for my feet.
You know what time it is?
Yes.
It's past time.
It is. So be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. There's lots of other questions people have had, but the basic reason we did a greenhouse here is it makes sense. It gave us extended seasons in both directions, both spring and fall. It means we don't have to grow seedlings in the kitchen or the dining room anymore. Do we ever do an emergency? Yes, because we've had several years in a row, actually, a super late frost where I pulled in we're out there with flashlights and headlamps pulling tomatoes into the house just to because we were having one last hard freeze down into the solid low 20s. And,
I think it was even lower than that.
We were afraid that we were going to freeze our tomatoes that were all ready to go out.
Say goodbye, Irene.
But it pays off in a big way because we get to choose our varieties. So until next time. Bye.
Bye. Don't forget to brainstorm.